The gunshot echoed through the canyon, and Dakota Calloway didn't flinch as he watched the coyote scatter into the brush, its hunt for his cattle interrupted but not forgotten. He lowered his rifle and mounted his horse in one fluid motion, the kind of economy that came from 26 years of speaking only when absolutely necessary, and moving with purpose the rest of the time. The Arizona sun beat down on Tucson with the relentless intensity of August 1882, turning the desert landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. Dakota had earned his reputation as the most withdrawn cowboy in 3 counties. Men who worked alongside him for months barely knew more than his name. He completed his tasks with efficiency, collected his pay, and disappeared into the solitude of his small ranch on the outskirts of town. The other ranch hands had long ago stopped trying to include him in their card games or invite him for whiskey at the saloon. He was a ghost who happened to breathe, present, but never really there. The cattle drive to the northern pastures took most of the day, and by the time Dakota returned to town, the late afternoon shadows stretched long across the dusty Main Street. He needed supplies before heading back to his ranch, nothing more than flour, coffee, and ammunition. The general store stood between the bank and the milliner's shop, its wooden sign creaking in the hot wind that never seemed to bring any relief from the heat. Dakota tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped onto the boardwalk, his boots leaving prints in the fine dust that covered everything in Tucson. He pushed open the door, the bell above jangling to announce his arrival. Old Mr. Henderson looked up from behind the counter, offered a nod that Dakota returned, and then both men settled into their usual routine of silent transaction. That routine shattered the moment she walked through the door. Amelia Edwards entered the general store like a whirlwind of energy, her dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun that was already losing the battle against the heat and the journey she'd clearly been on. Dust covered her traveling dress, and she carried a carpet bag that had seen better days. But what struck Dakota most, making him pause mid-reach for a bag of coffee beans, was the brightness in her hazel eyes. They held an intelligence and curiosity that seemed utterly out of place in the weary atmosphere of a desert town. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of the East Coast, probably Boston or Philadelphia. "I'm looking for directions to the Riverside Ranch. I was told it's about 10 miles outside of town, but the gentleman at the stage depot was remarkably unclear about which direction constitutes outside of town when a town sits in the middle of such an expanse." Mr. Henderson scratched his chin. "Riverside Ranch. That would be the old Patterson place. Been empty for near about 3 years now since old Thomas passed." Amelia's face fell, and Dakota saw something flicker across her features that looked like desperation trying to hide behind determination. "Empty, but I inherited it from my uncle. I have the deed right here." She fumbled in her bag, producing a folded document. "Oh, sure enough, you'd be Thomas's niece then. He mentioned family back east a time or two. Place is yours, legal and proper. Just saying it has not been maintained, been sitting empty all this time." "I see." Amelia's shoulders straightened in a way that told Dakota she was used to facing disappointment head-on. "Nevertheless, I would appreciate those directions." Dakota had already turned back to his supplies, determined to stay out of whatever situation was unfolding. It was not his concern. He had learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems only led to complications, questions, and expectations he had no interest in meeting. "Head north out of town on the main road," Mr. Henderson was saying. "About 8 miles up you will see a split. Take the western fork. Another 2 miles and you cannot miss it. Sits right up against the river canyon. Thank you kindly." Amelia paid for a few basic supplies with coins from a small purse, and Dakota noted the practiced way she counted her money. She was watching her funds carefully. As she turned to leave, her carpetbag caught on the corner of the counter, spilling its contents across the wooden floor. Dakota watched papers scatter, a small jewelry box tumble open, and various personal items spread in a mortifying display. Amelia dropped to her knees immediately, her cheeks flushing as she tried to gather everything quickly. Dakota stood frozen for a moment, every instinct telling him to look away, to let her handle her own affairs. But then he saw her hands shaking slightly as she reached for a photograph that had slid near his boots. The photograph showed a younger Amelia with a couple, probably her parents, all three of them smiling in formal poses. Against every habit he had cultivated, Dakota knelt down and began helping her gather the scattered belongings. He handed her the photograph without looking at it directly, then collected the papers that had fluttered furthest from her reach. "Thank you," she said quietly, and he could hear genuine gratitude rather than the automatic politeness most people offered. "I must seem like a complete disaster, 27 years old and still fumbling through life like a child." Dakota said nothing, just handed her the last of the papers and stood up. He expected that to be the end of it. He would return to his shopping, she would leave, and life would continue in its familiar, solitary pattern. But Amelia did not leave. She stood there, looking at him with those curious eyes, and then she did something that no one in Tucson had done in years. She asked him a direct question. "You're a rancher, aren't you? I can tell by your hands and the way you move. Do you know anything about the Riverside Ranch?" Dakota felt the familiar wall rising up, the instinct to give a one-word answer and turn away. But something about the genuine interest in her voice, the lack of judgment, made him pause. "Some," he heard himself say, and immediately wondered why he had said even that much. "Is it salvageable?" "The ranch, I mean." Mr. Henderson made it sound rather dire. Dakota considered lying, giving her false hope so she would leave him alone. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "The house needs work. Roof probably leaks, fences will be down, but the land is good. Water access is valuable here, so it can be restored." Hope lit up her face in a way that made something uncomfortable twist in Dakota's chest. "With time and money." He picked up his coffee beans and turned back to the counter, desperate to end this conversation. "Do you know anyone who might be willing to help me assess what needs to be done? I can pay, of course. Not a lot, but fairly." Mr. Henderson jumped in before Dakota could retreat. "Dakota here knows more about ranching than just about anyone in the territory. Been working cattle since he was barely tall enough to mount a horse." Dakota shot the storekeeper a look that should have withered him on the spot, but the old man just grinned, clearly enjoying himself immensely. "Would you be willing to ride out with me tomorrow morning?" Amelia asked, directing the full force of her attention on Dakota. "Just to look at the property and give me an honest assessment. I'll pay you for your time." Every part of Dakota wanted to refuse. This was exactly the kind of entanglement he avoided. But he made the mistake of looking at her directly, really looking, and he saw something in her expression that he recognized. It was the same desperate determination he had seen in his own mirror years ago, when he had been left with nothing but his father's debts and a strong back. "Dawn," he said, the word escaping before he could stop it. "Meet at the livery stable." The smile she gave him was brilliant and sincere. "Thank you, truly. I'm Amelia Edwards, by the way. Dakota Calloway." He paid for his supplies quickly and left before she could ask him anything else. That night, lying in his narrow bed at the ranch, Dakota stared at the ceiling and wondered what had possessed him to agree. He had built his entire adult life around solitude, around the careful maintenance of walls that kept people at a safe distance. One conversation, a few simple questions, and he had agreed to spend an entire morning with a woman who clearly did not understand the concept of comfortable silence. Dawn came too quickly. Dakota rode into town as the sun painted the desert in shades of orange and pink, the morning still cool enough to be almost pleasant. He expected to wait at the livery, for Amelia to be late, or to have reconsidered, or to have found someone else. Instead, she was already there, standing beside a rented horse and looking entirely too alert for such an early hour. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "I hope I picked a decent horse. The stable master recommended this mare, but I'm not terribly experienced with horses beyond basic riding." Dakota examined the mare with a practiced eye. "She will do fine for easy riding. Stay behind me on the trail." They rode out of Tucson in silence, and Dakota relaxed slightly, thinking perhaps Amelia would respect the quiet of the early morning. That hope lasted approximately 10 minutes. "How long have you been ranching?" she asked, guiding her horse alongside his as the trail widened. "Long enough." Dakota kept his eyes on the horizon. "Did you grow up here in Arizona?" "Yes. I've never been this far west before. It's remarkable how different everything is. The light, the air, even the way the silence feels. Back in Philadelphia, silence means something's wrong. Here it seems to be the natural state of things." Dakota glanced at her, surprised by the observation. "Philadelphia?" "Yes, born and raised. My uncle left there decades ago for this life. I never understood why until now. There's something about all this space that makes you feel like you could actually breathe fully for the first time." Despite himself, Dakota felt a small spark of curiosity. "Why did you come? Could have sold the property from Philadelphia." "I needed a fresh start." Amelia's voice lost some of its brightness. "My father died 6 months ago. Mother passed when I was young. I was living with my aunt and uncle, my mother's brother and his wife, but after father's death, they made it clear I was no longer welcome. I was teaching at a girls' school, but the salary barely covered my room at the boarding house. When the letter came about Uncle Thomas's ranch, it felt like providence." Dakota understood that kind of desperation, the feeling of having nowhere else to turn. "Your aunt and uncle, they should have helped you." "Should have, yes, but families are complicated things." She looked at him with interest. "Do you have family here?" "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry." But the thing was, it had not felt like prying. It felt like genuine interest, and Dakota could not remember the last time anyone had asked him personal questions without an agenda. Usually, people wanted something, information they could use or gossip they could spread. Amelia just seemed curious about him as a person. "Parents died when I was 17, he found himself saying. "Cholera outbreak. Sister went to live with relatives in California. Have not seen her in 9 years. That must be terribly lonely." Dakota shrugged. "You get used to it, do you?" "Get used to it, I mean." Amelia's voice held a note of real worry. "Because I've been trying to get used to being alone since father died, and it just seems to get harder, not easier." He had no answer for that, so he said nothing, but something in his chest tightened at the vulnerability in her admission. They rode in silence for a while longer, but it was a different kind of silence now, one that felt less like avoidance and more like shared understanding. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature began its daily assault. Dakota pointed out landmarks, bits of information he offered without being asked, surprising himself with each word. "That ridge is where Apaches used to signal each other. Creek bed there runs heavy during the monsoons. Rattlesnakes like the rocks near that outcropping." "You're very observant," Amelia said. "I imagine you have to be living out here. Paying attention keeps you alive." What's the most important thing you've learned about surviving out here? The question caught Dakota off guard. Most people asked about gunfights or Indians or the dramatic aspects of Western life. No one asked about actual survival. Water, he said finally. Everything else you can manage without for a while, but water means life or death. Your uncle's ranch, it has river access. That's worth more than gold in this territory. I'll remember that. Amelia pulled out a small notebook from her pocket and actually wrote it down. What are you doing? Taking notes. I have so much to learn and I don't want to forget anything important. She looked at him with complete sincerity. You're teaching me valuable things. I want to remember them. Something about seeing his words written down, deemed important enough to preserve, affected Dakota in a way he could not quite name. He had spent so long being invisible, his thoughts and knowledge mattering to no one, that having someone actively seek and value his input felt foreign and oddly compelling. The Riverside Ranch appeared in the distance, and Dakota had to admit it looked worse than he had remembered. The house sagged visibly, several windows were broken, and the fences had collapsed in multiple places. The barn had lost part of its roof, and weeds had taken over what had once been a kitchen garden. Amelia sat on her horse in silence, staring at the ruins of her inheritance. Dakota watched her face, expecting tears or despair or anger. Instead, he saw her expression shift through several emotions before settling on determination. Well, she said finally, at least it's not on fire. The unexpected humor startled a short laugh out of Dakota, a sound so rusty and unfamiliar that Amelia's head whipped around to stare at him. Did you just laugh? I didn't think you were capable of such a thing. She was grinning now. That's a good sign. If you can laugh at this disaster, then it can't be completely hopeless. They dismounted and Dakota began a thorough inspection of the property. Amelia followed him everywhere, asking questions about everything. How could you tell if the foundation was sound? What kind of wood was best for repairs in this climate? How many cattle could the land support? What did you look for in a water source? At first, Dakota answered in single words or short phrases, but Amelia's questions were intelligent and specific. She listened carefully to his answers, asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually thinking about what he said. Before long, Dakota found himself explaining things in detail, pointing out problems and potential solutions, discussing the challenges of ranching in Arizona territory. The biggest issue is the roof, he said, standing in what had once been the main room of the house. Rain will destroy everything if you do not fix that first. After that, windows and doors, then you can worry about making it comfortable. How much do you think materials would cost? Amelia was writing everything down. Dakota calculated quickly. Depends on quality. Do it right, maybe $300. Do it cheap and have to redo it in 2 years, maybe half that. Amelia's face fell. I have $87 to my name. Then you need to earn money while you fix the place. Can you cook? Reasonably well, yes. Restaurant in town is always looking for help, or you could take in laundry mending. Some of the bigger ranches need help during busy seasons. You think I should work in town and fix this place slowly? Amelia looked around the dilapidated house. That could take years. Better than rushing and doing it wrong, or running out of money halfway through and being stuck. Dakota kicked at a loose floorboard. This place sat empty for 3 years. Few more months will not make much difference. I suppose you're right, Amelia sighed. It's just hard to be patient when you finally have something that's yours, you know? Dakota did know, more than he wanted to admit. His own ranch was small and modest, but he had built every fence and repaired every building with his own hands. That kind of ownership, earned through sweat and time, meant something deeper than just possession. They spent another hour examining the property. Dakota showed her where the property lines ran, where the best grazing land was located, where flash floods might be a danger. Amelia asked about soil quality, native plants, wildlife, seasonal weather patterns. Her questions were endless, but Dakota found he did not mind as much as he expected. She actually cared about the answers. As they prepared to ride back to town, Amelia turned to him with a serious expression. "I can't pay you what your knowledge is worth, but I'd like to compensate you for today. Would $5 be acceptable?" Dakota shook his head. "Keep your money. You need it for materials. Then at least let me cook you dinner. I'm staying at the boarding house, but Mrs. Chen, who runs it, said I could use her kitchen. It's the least I can do to thank you." Every instinct told Dakota to refuse, to take his leave and ride back to his solitary life. But the thought of another night alone with nothing but his own thoughts and a cold meal held less appeal than usual. "All right," he said, and watched Amelia's face light up with genuine pleasure. Dinner that evening was surprisingly good. Amelia had a talent for making simple ingredients taste special, and she kept up a steady stream of conversation that should have been exhausting but somehow was not. She talked about Philadelphia, about teaching at the girls' school, about books she had read and places she hoped to see someday. But she also asked Dakota questions, real questions about his life and thoughts and opinions. "What's the best part of ranching?" she asked as they ate apple pie that Mrs. Chen had contributed. Dakota thought about it, really considered the question instead of brushing it off. "The quiet. The way you can see weather coming from miles away. Watching cattle thrive because you did everything right. You love it." "Yes." The admission felt strange but honest. "I hope I can learn to love it too," Amelia said softly. "I hope I can make a real life here. You will need help." Dakota heard himself saying, "Place like that, one person alone will struggle, need to fix the roof before the monsoon season. That is maybe 6 weeks away. Are you offering to help?" Amelia's eyes were bright with hope. "I could spare some weekends, in exchange for meals." The offer came out before Dakota fully thought it through, but once said he did not take it back. "That would be wonderful. Truly, Dakota, I can't thank you enough." That night, riding back to his ranch under a sky full of stars, Dakota wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had spent years perfecting solitude, and now he had committed to spending weekends with the most talkative woman he had ever met. It made no logical sense, but it also felt like the first right decision he had made in a long time. The following Saturday, Dakota arrived at the Riverside Ranch at dawn with tools and materials he had brought from his own supplies. Amelia was already there, wearing practical work clothes and looking determined. She had spent the week working at the restaurant in town and had clearly been cleaning the ranch house in her spare time. "I've cleared out most of the debris from inside," she announced proudly. "And I found Uncle Thomas's old journals. He kept meticulous records of everything. It's like having a guidebook to this place." They worked together in a rhythm that developed naturally. Dakota handled the heavy labor and skilled work, while Amelia assisted, learned, and asked her constant questions. She wanted to know how to do everything herself, not just watch him do it. Dakota found himself teaching her properly, taking time to explain techniques and letting her try things under his supervision. "Why do you angle the nails that way?" she asked as they repaired the roof. "Gives them better grip, less likely to work loose in the wind. And you space them evenly because distributes the stress. One section fails, the rest holds." "You're a very good teacher," Amelia said, carefully driving a nail at the angle he had shown her. "Patient and clear. No one ever said that before." Then no one was paying attention. She paused in her work to look at him. "You know so much, Dakota. Why don't you share it more? Other ranchers would probably value your knowledge." The question hit closer to home than Dakota wanted to admit. Talking is complicated. How so? He set down his hammer, surprised to find himself wanting to explain. When you talk, people make assumptions. They think they know you, think they understand. Then they expect things, want things. Easier to just stay quiet. But doesn't that get lonely? Lonely is safer than disappointed. Amelia was quiet for a moment, and Dakota wondered if he had said too much, revealed too much. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle. Someone hurt you badly, made you think silence was protection. Dakota did not respond, but he did not need to. Amelia seemed to understand that some truths were too painful to speak aloud. She went back to work, but after a few minutes, she started talking again, this time about something lighter, a funny incident at the restaurant. The tension eased, and Dakota felt grateful for her instinct not to push. They worked through the morning, stopping only when the sun grew too intense. Amelia had brought lunch, sandwiches and lemonade, and they sat in the shade of the one tree near the house. "Tell me about your sister," Amelia said. "The one in California." "Why?" "Because you mentioned her once, and you got this look on your face, like you missed her but did not want to." Dakota was beginning to realize that Amelia saw far more than he was comfortable with. "Her name is Dorothy. She was 14 when she left. Relatives offered to take her, give her opportunities, made sense for her to go. But not for you. I was nearly 18, old enough to manage on my own. Besides, they only wanted her. That must have hurt. It had deeply, but Dakota had never said that out loud. It was practical. They had limited resources. Practical and hurtful are not mutually exclusive. Amelia took a sip of lemonade. "Do you write to her?" "Sometimes. She writes more. Got married 2 years ago, has a baby now." "And you've never visited?" Dakota shrugged. "California is far, ranch needs tending." "Or maybe it's easier to keep her at a distance, like everyone else." Amelia's voice was kind, not accusing, but the observation still stung because it was true. "You ask a lot of questions," Dakota said, not quite a complaint. "I know. It's a terrible habit. My father used to say I could interrogate a stone and get it to confess its secrets." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "He meant it fondly, I think. He always answered my questions, no matter how silly. Said curiosity was a gift, not a flaw. He sounds like he was a good man. The best." Amelia's voice caught slightly. "I miss him every day. We used to have these long conversations about everything and nothing. Philosophy, science, literature, the meaning of life. After he died, I realized how rare that was, having someone who actually wanted to hear your thoughts. Most people just wait for their turn to talk." Dakota understood that more than she knew. "You do not do that. Wait for your turn. You actually listen. So do you when you choose to speak." Amelia met his eyes. "You hear what people are really saying, not just the words." The observation felt too intimate, too seeing. Dakota stood up, ready to return to the safer territory of physical work, but Amelia's next question stopped him. "Why did you really agree to help me? You clearly prefer being alone, yet here you are, spending your free time fixing up a stranger's ranch." Dakota could have deflected, could have given a practical answer about neighborly duty or fair exchange. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "Because you asked, and you actually wanted to hear the answer. Because you looked at this broken-down place and saw possibility instead of just running away. And because—" He hesitated, then pushed forward, "because for the first time in years, someone seemed interested in what I had to say." Amelia's expression softened into something warm and understanding. "I am interested. In what you have to say, in who you are. You're fascinating, Dakota Calloway, whether you believe it or not." No one had ever called him fascinating. The word felt strange and uncomfortable and somehow exactly right. Dakota did not know how to respond, so he did what he always did when emotions got too complicated. He went back to work, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. As the day progressed, Dakota found himself talking more, sharing stories from his past, opinions about ranching and life in the territory. Amelia listened to everything, asked questions, laughed at his dry observations, and occasionally challenged his assumptions in ways that made him think. By the time the sun started to set, they had made significant progress on the roof. More importantly, Dakota realized he had talked more in one day than he typically did in a month, and it had not been exhausting or uncomfortable. It had felt natural. Same time next week. Amelia asked as they packed up tools. Yes, Dakota surprised himself by adding, could use help with cattle work at my place on Wednesday if you are available. Fair is fair. I'd love that. I should learn how to actually manage cattle if I'm going to run a ranch. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Weekends at the Riverside Ranch, making steady progress on repairs. Occasional weekday evenings when Amelia would come to Dakota's ranch, and he would teach her about cattle, horses, and the practical aspects of ranching. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they became friends. Dakota found himself thinking about Amelia during the long days of work. He wondered what she would think about things, how she would phrase a question, what observation she might make. When something interesting happened, his first thought was often that he wanted to tell her about it. The realization should have frightened him, but instead, it felt like waking up from a long sleep. Amelia, for her part, seemed equally affected. She started asking more personal questions, not just about ranching but about Dakota's thoughts, feelings, and dreams. She shared more of herself too, talking about her fears and hopes, the grief she still carried for her father, her determination to build a new life. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch of the Riverside Ranch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Amelia asked the question Dakota had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. You ever get scared of caring about something or someone again? Dakota knew she was not just asking about ranching or property. Every day. But you're here anyway. Yes. Why? Her voice was soft, vulnerable. Dakota looked at her, really looked, and admitted what he had been avoiding for weeks. Because you make the quiet feel less empty. Because your questions make me think instead of just exist. Because when I'm with you, I remember that I'm more than just someone going through motions. Amelia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I was so alone before I came here. I thought maybe I would always be alone, that maybe I was not the kind of person people wanted around. Too many questions, too much curiosity, always wanting to understand everything. You're exactly the kind of person people should want around. Dakota's voice was rough with emotion he could not quite control. You see people. Really see them. You saw me when I was doing everything possible to be invisible. I'm glad I saw you. Amelia reached over and took his hand, the first deliberately intimate contact between them. I'm glad you let me. Dakota looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her skin against his, the simple human connection he had denied himself for so long. Every instinct still screamed at him to pull away, to protect himself, to retreat into the safety of isolation. But a stronger instinct, one he was just learning to trust, told him to hold on. I care about you, he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. I did not want to, tried not to, but you kept asking questions and I kept answering, and somehow that turned into this. Into what? Amelia's voice held hope and fear in equal measure, into something real, into mattering to someone again. You matter to me, Amelia said firmly. More than I expected, more than is probably wise given how short a time we've known each other. But there it is. You've become one of the most important people in my life." They sat in silence, hands still clasped, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert began its nightly transformation. Dakota felt something in his chest loosening, old walls crumbling in a way that was terrifying and liberating at once. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "Relationships, caring, being close to someone. I have spent years avoiding it. Neither do I, really. I've never been in love before." Amelia paused, then added with characteristic directness, "Is that what this is? Love?" The question should have sent Dakota running. Instead, he squeezed her hand and found himself answering honestly. "I think so, yes." "Well then." Amelia's smile was tremulous but genuine. "I suppose we will figure it out together, through trial and error and lots of questions." Despite the emotional intensity of the moment, Dakota found himself almost smiling. "So many questions. And you'll answer them." There was real anxiety in her voice now. "Even when it's hard, even when you want to retreat." Dakota thought about what she was really asking. Would he stay? Would he trust her with his thoughts and feelings? Would he let himself be vulnerable? "Yes," he said and meant it. "I will answer. I cannot promise I will be good at it. Cannot promise I will not struggle, but I will try. That's all I need." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, and Dakota felt the rightness of it, the way she fit against him like she belonged there. "Just try. Keep talking to me. Keep letting me see you." They sat together as the stars emerged, not talking, just being present with each other. Dakota realized that silence could be shared, that it did not have to mean isolation. With Amelia beside him, the quiet felt full instead of empty, peaceful instead of lonely. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Dakota's life. He and Amelia were courting now, though neither of them officially announced it. In a small town like Tucson, people noticed when the Withdrawn Cowboy started spending all his free time with the newcomer from Philadelphia. The ranch hands who worked nearby ranches started nodding with knowing looks. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house stopped charging Amelia for the kitchen when Dakota came for dinner. But along with the joy of connection came the challenges Dakota had feared. There were moments when old habits reasserted themselves, when he would close off in the middle of a conversation, when the vulnerability became too much, and he would retreat. The first time it happened, he was convinced it would be the end. They had been discussing the future, making plans for the Riverside Ranch. Amelia had asked if he could see himself being part of that future, living there with her once it was fixed up. The question had touched on every fear Dakota had spent years building walls around: permanence, commitment, risking his heart completely. He had shut down mid-sentence, his expression going blank, and stood up to leave without explanation. Amelia had not tried to stop him, had just said quietly, "Come back when you're ready. I'll be here." Dakota had ridden back to his ranch in a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to keep riding, to disappear and return to the safety of solitude. But a larger part, the part that Amelia had awakened, could not bear the thought of losing her. She had not demanded anything, had not pushed or manipulated. She had simply asked a question and given him space to answer in his own time. He returned the next morning, exhausted from a sleepless night. Amelia was working in what would eventually be the garden, pulling weeds with determined efficiency. She looked up when he approached, dirt smudged on her cheek, and waited. "I got scared," Dakota said without preamble. "You asked about the future and I panicked." "I know." Amelia stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. "It was too much too fast. I should have realized." "No," Dakota shook his head. "You did nothing wrong. This is my problem, my fear. I just need you to be patient while I work through it." "I can be patient." Amelia stepped closer. "But I need you to promise me something. When you get scared, when you want to run, talk to me first. Even if it's just to say you need space. Don't just disappear. That's the one thing I could not handle. I promise." Dakota reached for her hand. "I want that future you asked about. Want to build something with you. It just terrifies me because everyone I've cared about has left, and if I let myself really love you and then lose you. You might lose me anyway. I could get sick or hurt. Life has no guarantees." Amelia's voice was gentle but firm. "But I'm here now, and I want to be here tomorrow and next month and next year. I'm not planning on going anywhere. Neither am I." The words felt like a vow. They worked through his fears together, with Amelia asking careful questions and Dakota doing his best to answer honestly. It was not easy. There were more moments of retreat, more times when Dakota struggled with vulnerability. But each time he came back. Each time he tried a little harder to stay open, to communicate, to trust. Amelia had her own struggles too. Her determination to be self-sufficient sometimes crossed into stubbornness, refusing help even when she needed it. She pushed herself too hard, working at the restaurant and on the ranch until she was exhausted. Dakota learned to recognize the signs, to insist she rest, to remind her that accepting help was not weakness. "You do not have to do everything alone," he told her one evening when he found her practically asleep on her feet after a long shift followed by hours of work on the house. "I need to prove I can manage, that I'm not some helpless Eastern woman who made a mistake coming here." "To who? Everyone can see you are managing. You are running yourself into the ground trying to prove something no one is questioning." Amelia had broken down then, admitting her fears that if she was not constantly proving her worth, people would dismiss her, send her away like her aunt and uncle had. Dakota had held her while she cried, understanding completely the fear of not being enough. "You are enough," he said firmly. "More than enough. And you have people who want to help, not because you are weak, but because they care about you. Let them. Let me." It became a mutual process of learning to lean on each other, to communicate needs and fears, to navigate the complicated territory of intimacy. They taught each other in different ways. Amelia taught Dakota that vulnerability was strength, that sharing thoughts and feelings deepened connection rather than creating obligation. Dakota taught Amelia that accepting help was not surrender, that building something meaningful sometimes required a foundation of trust and partnership. The Riverside Ranch slowly transformed under their combined efforts. The roof was completely repaired by mid-October, just before the first significant rain. Windows were replaced, doors rehung, floors repaired. By November, the house was livable, and Amelia moved out of the boarding house with genuine excitement. Dakota helped her move her few possessions and found himself reluctant to leave at the end of the day. "You could stay," Amelia said as he prepared to mount his horse. "There's plenty of room, and it seems silly for you to ride all the way back to your place when you're here most days anyway." The invitation was casual, but Dakota heard the real question underneath. Was he ready for that level of commitment? For living together, for truly joining their lives? "People will talk," he said, not quite a refusal. "People are already talking. Mrs. Chen asked me last week when the wedding would be." Amelia stepped closer. "I know it's a big step. If you're not ready, I understand, but I want you here. Not just visiting, but really here, building this life together." Dakota thought about his small ranch, the place he had built as a fortress against the world. It had served its purpose, keeping him safe and isolated. But it had never been a home, not really. Home was not a place, he was learning. It was a feeling, a sense of belonging, of being truly seen and valued. "I'll need to maintain my property, make sure it does not fall apart, of course. And I am not always good company. Sometimes I will need space, time to myself. I understand that. But yes." Dakota met her eyes. Yes, I want to stay. I want to build this life with you. Amelia's smile was incandescent. She threw her arms around him, and Dakota held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. This was real, more real than anything he had allowed himself in years. Moving in together brought a new level of intimacy and challenge. They learned each other's habits, the small quirks and routines that defined daily life. Dakota discovered that Amelia sang while cooking, that she rayed late into the night, that she was grumpy in the mornings until she had coffee. Amelia learned that Dakota was meticulous about tools, that he woke before dawn regardless of when he went to sleep, that he needed at least an hour of quiet solitude each day to feel centered. They argued occasionally, normal disagreements about decisions and priorities. But they learned to fight fair, to explain their perspectives rather than retreat into silence or anger. Dakota discovered that conflict did not have to mean the end of a relationship, that working through disagreements could actually strengthen their bond. "Why do you always want to discuss everything?" he asked in frustration one day after a disagreement about how to allocate their limited funds. "Because that's how we understand each other," Amelia replied. "If we don't talk about it, we're just making assumptions. And assumptions lead to resentment. Talking is exhausting. I know it is for you, but it's necessary. Would you rather I just stayed quiet and built up frustration until I exploded?" Dakota sighed. "No. Then we talk it through, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He realized she was right. The talking, the questions, the constant communication, it was the foundation of everything they were building. Without it, they would just be two people living parallel lives. With it, they were partners. Winter came to Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. The ranch began to truly feel like home. They acquired a few head of cattle, started rebuilding the herd that would be their primary income. Dakota taught Amelia everything he knew about cattle management, and she proved to be a quick learner with good instincts. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire after a long day's work, Amelia asked the question that had been hovering between them for weeks. "Where do you see us in 5 years?" Dakota had learned to appreciate these questions rather than fear them. They helped him articulate hopes he had never let himself fully acknowledge. "Here. Bigger herd, better house. Maybe married." He paused, then added quietly, "Maybe children if you want them." "I do want them." Amelia moved closer, tucking herself against his side. "I want to build a family with you, a real home full of life and love and probably chaos. I'm not sure I'll be good at it, family. I have not had one in so long. We'll learn together. We've been doing that all along." She looked up at him. "Is that a proposal?" The maybe married part, Dakota realized it had been in his awkward, uncertain way. "I suppose it is, not very romantic." "It's perfect because it's you, honest and straightforward." Amelia sat up, turning to face him fully. "But let me answer properly. Yes, Dakota Calloway, I want to marry you. I want to build this life together, officially and permanently." Dakota kissed her then, pouring into the gesture all the emotions he still struggled to express in words. Love, gratitude, wonder that this woman had seen past his walls to the person underneath, that she had asked questions until he remembered how to answer, that she had waited patiently while he learned to open his heart again. They married in February 1883, a simple ceremony at the small church in Tucson. There were no elaborate preparations or formal celebrations. Dakota's former ranch hands served as witnesses, along with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Henderson. It was small and practical and exactly right for both of them. Their wedding night was spent at the ranch, in the home they had already been building together. Dakota found himself nervous, worried about disappointing Amelia, about not knowing how to express physically what he felt emotionally. But Amelia, with her characteristic directness and compassion, guided them through with patience and genuine affection. "Tell me what you're thinking," she whispered in the darkness afterward, her head on his chest. "That I'm grateful. That I did not think I could have this connection, love, a real partnership, that you changed everything. You changed everything for me too. I came here running from loss and loneliness. I found home. I found you. Life settled into a new rhythm as husband and wife." The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They worked hard, made smart decisions, and supported each other through challenges. Dakota found that his reputation began to shift. Other ranchers started seeking his advice, recognizing the knowledge he had always possessed but never shared. With Amelia's encouragement, he became more active in the ranching community, attending meetings and contributing to discussions about water rights and grazing land management. Amelia thrived in ways she never had in Philadelphia. The physical work suited her, and she loved the direct connection between effort and results. She started teaching some of the children in town basic reading and arithmetic in the evenings, unable to completely leave behind her passion for education. The community welcomed her contributions, and she built genuine friendships with other women in Tucson. In the spring of 1884, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Dakota with a complex mixture of joy and terror. He wanted this child desperately, but feared he would not know how to be a father, that his years of isolation had broken something essential. "You'll be a wonderful father," Amelia assured him when he voiced these fears. "You're patient and kind, and you teach me things every day." Children need exactly those qualities. What if I do not know what to say? What if I retreat when things get hard? Then I'll be there to help. We're partners, remember? We face everything together. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "This child will be so loved." That's what matters most. The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia struggled with sickness in the early months, and the heat of summer made her exhausted and uncomfortable. Dakota found himself hovering, worried about every discomfort, driving Amelia to occasional exasperation with his overprotectiveness. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said firmly when he tried to prevent her from doing any physical work. "I need to stay active. The doctor said so." "But what if something happens? What if something happens whether I'm active or not? We can't control everything, Dakota. We just have to trust that things will work out." It was a hard lesson for both of them, learning to balance care with trust, concern with faith. They navigated it together, with many conversations and occasional arguments, always coming back to their foundation of communication and mutual respect. Their son was born in January 1885, during a rare cold snap that left frost on the desert plants. The labor was long and difficult, and Dakota spent hours pacing anxiously while the midwife and doctor attended Amelia. When he was finally allowed into the room, he found his wife exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Meet your son," she said softly. "What should we name him?" Dakota looked at the impossibly small face, the tiny fingers curled into fists, and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his child, his son, a person who would depend on him for everything. The weight of it was crushing and beautiful at once. "Thomas," he said. "After your uncle, the man who gave us both a chance at this life." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Calloway. It's perfect." Fatherhood challenged Dakota in ways he never anticipated. The baby needed constant attention, cried for reasons Dakota could not decipher, and turned their organized life into controlled chaos. But Thomas also brought unexpected joy. Dakota found himself talking to his son constantly, narrating his actions, explaining the world around them, sharing all the thoughts and observations he had kept bottled up for years. "You are making him a conversationalist before he can even hold his head up," Amelia teased, watching Dakota explain cloud formations to their 2-month-old son. "He should know things, should understand how the world works. He will, because he has you to teach him." Amelia kissed Dakota's cheek. "You're a wonderful father. I hope you're starting to believe that." Dakota was starting to believe it. The fear was still there, would probably always be there to some degree, but the love he felt for his son was stronger than any fear. He would make mistakes, certainly, but he would learn from them. He would be present and honest and do his best. That was all anyone could do. Life continued to unfold with its mixture of challenges and blessings. The ranch grew steadily more prosperous. Dakota's reputation as a knowledgeable and fair-dealing rancher brought opportunities for partnerships and collaboration. Amelia's teaching expanded to a formal school that met 3 times a week, serving a dozen children from nearby ranches and town. In 1887, their daughter was born, a fierce little creature they named Catherine after Dakota's mother. Thomas was 2 years old now, already showing signs of his father's quiet observation and his mother's endless curiosity. Dakota watched his children grow with amazement, constantly surprised by their personalities and needs. "How do you always know what they need?" he asked Amelia one evening after she had effortlessly calmed Catherine's fussing while simultaneously answering Thomas's string of questions about horses. "I pay attention, and I ask when I'm not sure, just like I did with you," she smiled. "Everything I learned about communication and patience, I learned by asking you questions until you answered." Dakota thought about that, about how one person's persistent curiosity had changed his entire life. He had been so closed off, so convinced that isolation was safety. Amelia had gently but firmly refused to accept his walls, had kept asking questions until he remembered how to answer, until he rediscovered the parts of himself he had buried. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up, for asking questions, for seeing me when I was trying to be invisible." Amelia set Catherine in her cradle and came to sit beside Dakota. "I should thank you, too, for answering, for trusting me enough to open up, for teaching me that I could have a real home and partnership." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children sleep, feeling the weight and wonder of the life they had built. It was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves. It was better, richer, more real than anything they could have planned. The years passed, bringing the natural evolution of life. Thomas and Catherine grew, joined eventually by another son they named Daniel. The Riverside Ranch became known throughout the territory as a well-managed, prosperous operation. Dakota served on the Territorial Livestock Association, his expertise finally recognized and valued. Amelia's school became an established institution, eventually moving into its own building that the community built together. In 1895, more than 13 years after that first meeting in the general store, Dakota and Amelia sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their children were inside, Thomas now helping his siblings with evening chores, all 3 of them exhibiting the values their parents had worked hard to instill. "You remember what you asked me that first day," Dakota said, breaking a comfortable silence. "In Mr. Henderson's store. I asked if you knew anything about ranching." Amelia smiled at the memory. "You said some and looked like you wanted to disappear." "I did want to disappear. You made me nervous." "I make you nervous?" Amelia laughed. "I'm the least intimidating person alive. You asked questions. Real questions. You wanted actual answers. No one had done that in years." Dakota took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over their years together. "I thought I was happy alone, thought I had everything figured out. Then you showed up and asked me about cattle fences and water rights and why I was so determined to be invisible. And you answered. That's the important part. You could have stayed closed off, could have given me one-word answers and sent me away, but you didn't. You took a chance. Best decision I ever made." Dakota meant it completely. His life before Amelia felt like a half-life, a shadow of what existence could be. She had taught him that connection was worth the risk, that vulnerability was strength, that love was the most important thing a person could build. "We built something good here," Amelia said, looking out over the ranch, the house, the land that had gone from ruin to thriving home. "Something real and lasting. We did." Dakota pulled her closer. "And it started because you refused to accept silence as an answer. Because you kept asking questions until I remembered how to speak." Their children came out onto the porch then, Thomas carrying Daniel while Catherine ran ahead to climb into her mother's lap. The family sat together as the stars emerged, talking about the day, making plans for tomorrow, existing in the comfortable chaos of a life fully lived. Dakota looked at his wife, at his children, at the home they had all created together, and felt a deep gratitude for the woman who had walked into a general store 12 years ago and refused to let him disappear. She had asked questions, simple questions about ranching and land and life, and he had found himself answering. In those answers, he had found his voice again, his heart, his capacity for connection and love. The withdrawn cowboy who never shared his thoughts had learned to speak, to trust, to open his heart. And in doing so, he had discovered that the life he had been protecting himself from was the only life worth living. Amelia had taught him that through patience and persistence and genuine interest. She had seen past his walls to the person underneath, the man who had so much to say if only someone would ask the right questions. As the desert night settled around them, and his family's voices filled the air with warmth and life, Dakota Calloway knew with absolute certainty that he was home. Not just in a physical place, but in the deepest sense of belonging, of being known and loved, of having built something meaningful with another person. The silence that had once been his protection had transformed into something far more valuable, the comfortable quiet of shared understanding, punctuated by conversation, laughter, and the endless questions of a woman who had changed everything by simply refusing to accept that silence was an answer. Years later, when Thomas asked his father what the secret was to a happy life, Dakota thought carefully before answering, drawing on everything he had learned from the woman who had taught him to speak his heart. "Find someone who asks you questions and actually wants to hear the answers," he said. "Someone who sees you, really sees you, even when you're trying to be invisible. And when you find that person, be brave enough to answer honestly. That's where everything good begins." Thomas nodded thoughtfully, absorbing his father's wisdom. Dakota watched his son and felt the deep satisfaction of knowing he had broken the cycle of isolation, that his children would grow up understanding the value of connection and communication. They would make their own mistakes, certainly, but they would do so with the foundation of love and openness that he and Amelia had built. The Riverside Ranch continued to thrive, passing eventually to the next generation and the one after that. But its true legacy was not in the land or the cattle or the buildings. It was in the story of two people who found each other in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory, who learned together how to be vulnerable and strong, who built a life on the simple foundation of questions asked and honestly answered. It was a love story written in conversation and silence, in patient teaching and eager learning, in the gradual opening of a heart that had thought itself permanently closed. Dakota Calloway, the withdrawn cowboy who never shared his thoughts, had learned to speak. And in speaking, he had found everything he had been missing: love, family, purpose, and the deep joy of being truly known by another person. It had started with questions, with Amelia's gentle insistence that silence was not an acceptable answer, with her genuine interest in who he was beneath the carefully constructed walls. And it had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime, a partnership that weathered every challenge, a family that carried forward the lessons of openness and communication. As Dakota grew older, he never lost his appreciation for the miracle of what Amelia had given him. She had asked questions, and he had found himself answering. In those answers, he had discovered not just his voice, but his entire self, the man he was meant to be, the life he was meant to live, the love that had been waiting for him if only he had been brave enough to reach for it. And every day, for the rest of his life, he remained grateful that a curious woman from Philadelphia had walked into a general store and refused to accept that a man who never spoke had nothing to say. She had known better. She had seen the truth of him, and in seeing it, she had set him free.